James takes us into this section of his epistle in chapter 2 and verse 14 down to verse 26, and he does so with questions. I think there are 13 questions in total in this section, because James wants us to think about this ourselves, to assess what he says and come to our own conclusions, and that's what we'll seek to do as we go down through the verses. And so we see again, he begins a new subject with this expression, my brethren. Two questions then in this verse. What does it profit, my brethren? If someone says he has faith but does not have works, can faith save him? So the question initially is, what does it profit? Now we'll see that as we go down is repeated further on down the verses, the question of profit. And the second question here is, can faith save him? Now the profit here is linked to this question, can faith save him? That's really the issue here. That's the benefit, the profit that's in view. It's saving faith. So the question that he really wants to ask here in this verse is, if someone says he has faith but does not have works, can faith save him? Now the faith he's talking about here is the faith that he will speak about in this verse. That is, if someone says he has faith but does not have works. So he's really speaking about faith, professed faith without works. Can that faith save? Is that saving faith? Now, there are one or two questions that come out of this. First of all, it is the idea of saying. So someone professes faith, but that faith is not accompanied by works. Now, is that possible? So faith without works, is it possible? Does such faith exist? Well, we want to see from John chapter 8 an example that such faith does exist. And then the second issue really that we want to think about in this study is the question of works. What are works? So if it is faith without works, is that possible? And what are these works? We need to have a think about that. The first then issue that we thought about was, is it possible to have faith without works? Does such faith exist? And I mentioned John chapter 8 as being an example of that faith. So the Lord Jesus is talking to Jews in verse number 30 of John 8, and it says that as he spoke, that is, as the Lord Jesus spoke these words, the words prior to verse number 30, and this is the crucial bit of this sentence that we want to think about, many believed in him. So you would say in biblical language, there is an evidence, or there is an example of faith, for many believed in him. Now that's repeated in verse number 31. Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed in him, or who believed him. So there are Jews, and we see in verse 30 that many believed in him. So now they are described as Jews who believed in him. So the Lord Jesus is speaking to those people. And then he says, if you abide, and that is the idea of constantly abide. It is a practice of life. It is the character of life. If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. My disciples indeed. So this is conditional. And it's actually a condition spoken to people who believed in him. So people who believed in him, if they would abide in his word, then they are his disciples. That is, true disciples. Not just those who profess, but those who actually continue in his word. Then you come down later on, and I've jumped quite a few verses here to demonstrate that these people who believed in Jesus were not abiding in his word, were not actually his disciples indeed. Because in verse 59, when the Lord Jesus actually spoke his word, then their attitude to his word was manifested when they took up stones to throw at him. And Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. So here we have Jews who believed and who tried to kill Jesus. So here is an example of faith without works. Put some exclamation marks there rather than question marks. Now when we come back to James chapter 2, and we're down now to verse 15 from verse 14, he's going to give an example of what he means by works. So faith without works, that's the issue. Well, what are works? Here's an example. So he says, if a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled. So let's just start up at the top again. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body. Here's the question again of profit. What does it profit? You remember back in verse 14, we linked this idea of profit with the idea of saving faith. Where is the value? Where is the profit in such profession, in words, not connected to action? So let's just divide this up. Let's get the question here. What does it profit? And we can see the example that goes right round here. So here is the reality. Here is the need. A brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, hungry and naked, hungry and cold. And one of you says, there's the word, there's the crucial word, one of you says. So that's a person who is saying something, and they say all the right words, depart in peace, be warmed and filled. But those words are not connected to action. You do not give. So you say all the right thing, but your words are not backed up with action, because you don't give the things which are needful for the body. So you have the classic here of empty words. And empty words do nothing. So in verse number 17, thus also, there's the example, and that example demonstrates that faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. It's empty. It has no power. So we come back to verse number 14. The two questions, what does it profit? Can faith save him? Well, the answer, as we've seen, is that empty words equals no profit. Can faith save him? That faith, which is faith without works. Excuse the handwriting here. Faith without works, that faith cannot save. It is dead. Now he's going to go on and give illustrations of this balance between works and faith, and he'll speak about Rahab, he'll speak about Abraham, and we'll look at that in our next study. But the basic point is made here from verse 14, and we've seen it demonstrated in John chapter 8. We've seen it also illustrated with that practical example in verse 15 onwards. And so the two questions, we have their conclusion here. There is no profit, and that type of faith doesn't save. And it's the faith of someone who says, but has actually no evidence, no demonstration of that profession and reality of it in their life. What a challenge for any who profess faith in the Lord Jesus. What a challenge to examine our lives to see that these works are present, that what we say are not simply empty words, empty profession, but rather it is an expression of the reality of what our lives are. Faith without works is dead.